Today I'll be talking with you about the dark entities that crawl into your room in the dead of night, while you're sound asleep in bed. Sailing through dreamland with the illusion of safety, you suddenly open your eyes, but you can't move a muscle. Sleep paralysis. I'll be sharing the various legends and folklore surrounding this horrifying phenomenon from around the world. I'm your host James, and here is why this terrifying sleep paralysis demon always comes at 3 a.m. And we're starting off this list with Kanashibari. Kanashibari is the term used in Japan for sleep paralysis, translating to bound up with metal, referring to the sensation of being unable to move as if something is holding you down. In Japanese folklore, Kanashibari is attributed to vengeful spirits or demons, yokai, who possess their victims in the dead of night, immobilizing them and restricting their breathing. It is believed that these entities visit sleeping individuals and immobilize them as a means of exerting control or causing harm. Stories and legends about the experience have been passed down through generations, and people who experience this phenomenon often report hallucinations of eerie figures. They might hear sinister whispers and this overwhelming feeling of pressure upon the chest. There are various spiritual practices aimed at warding off these sleep demons. Protective measures include reciting prayers or mantras before sleep, or sleeping in specific positions like on your side in order to prevent the occurrence of Kanashibari. At number 9, we have the Boba. There are tons of different spirits and supernatural creatures in Bengali folklore, but one of them is the explanation for the strange experience of waking up in the middle of the night unable to move. That being the Boba, a type of spirit in Bengali folklore translating to dumb, unable to speak. And these entities have an awful habit crawling into people's homes when they're asleep on their backs, climbing onto their chests and strangling them. It's not certain what these creatures are said to look like, but from the few interpretations I've seen, they seem to have an almost goblin or troll-like appearance. Number 8, the ghost pushing you down. Many Cambodians refer to sleep paralysis as the ghost pushing you down, and it is believed that the terrifying phenomenon is caused by deceased relatives returning from the grave to visit their loved ones on Earth, and that is definitely a haunting idea. It's one thing to have a witch or an unknown spirit or demon harass you in the middle of the night. That's just what they do. It sucks, but it's not necessarily shocking. How do you expect a demon to treat you? But grandma coming back from the grave to strangle you in the middle of the night? That is very upsetting. I'd like to think if a relative came back from the dead to see me, they'd have something nice to say, or at least, at the very least, just try not to physically attack me. This also conjures up a creepy idea that if there is indeed an afterlife, it could be much more sinister than we'd like to believe. Next up, we have the Jinn. Primarily in pre-Islamic Arabian folklore, sleep paralysis was often thought to be caused by Jinn possession. Jinns are spirits that inhabit the earth, but are often unseen, able to take on a variety of different forms. They are mentioned in Islamic literature and are believed to be made of smokeless fire. They also possess free will and can be good, evil, or neutral. And it's sometimes said that during sleep paralysis, a person's body is vulnerable to Jinn, who may try to harm or even possess them. Next up, we have the Alp. The Alp is a creature from German folklore that is often associated with sleep paralysis. It is believed to be a demonic being or a malevolent spirit that specifically targets individuals while they're sleeping. It's described as a small, shadowy figure, sometimes resembling a cat or a snake, but it is also capable of transforming into other forms. It also always wears a cap. It sits on the victim's chests, rendering them immobile and causing a sensation of suffocation, often appearing in nightmares and feeding off the fear and anxiety of its victims. According to legend, there are some methods you can apply to ward off the Alp or even stop it from appearing entirely, so take some notes. You can start by plugging up all the holes in your living space. Probably a good thing to do, but anyway, whether you're worried about a sleep demon or not, you still don't want mice. There are also various methods used to protect yourself from the Alp, such as placing a broom, a pair of scissors under your pillow, or hanging iron horseshoes from your bedpost, as it is believed that the creature is afraid of these objects. I'd also be afraid of sleeping with scissors under my pillow, so don't do that. Number 5, the Old Hag. The Night Hag, or the Old Hag, is kind of a catch-all term for the sleep paralysis creepy hallucination phenomenon, but there are specific places in the world that refer to the entity specifically as the Old Hag, primarily in Newfoundland, Canada. As the story goes, the Old Hag creeps into your home while you're sleeping, climbing onto your chest, mobilizing you, and restricting your breathing. So, why is it that an Old Hag is thought to be responsible? Well, many of the early settlers in Newfoundland came from England, Ireland, and Scotland, where the old haggard witch archetype was a big part of the folklore. So probably these settlers would have brought these stories and beliefs with them. And how awful it would be growing up back in the day and waking up just being like, yeah, I woke up in the middle of the night unable to move. Felt like there was something sitting on my chest. And then your mom's like, oh yeah, that was the Old Hag. You had an evil witch crawl into your room and sit on you. Probably won't be the last time. Well, comforting explanation. Number 4, the Serpent. Now, this isn't one that's been documented throughout history extensively or anything. It's more of a personal account in my many years having experienced sleep paralysis, but I'm willing to bet there are people who have had something similar happen to them. So yeah, here's how the story goes. I was having a pretty good dream, and I was just lying in bed, and I know it was a dream because there was a woman there. Yes, only in my dreams does that ever happen. But things took a dark turn when this woman began to take on the form of a serpent, a massive-sized boa constrictor that began wrapping itself around me, strangling me, and preventing me from moving. Sleep paralysis, one of the many hallucinations I've had, happened like 9 years ago, still never forgotten it. I've had other sleep paralysis situations that are much more innocuous or just plain stupid, but this one really got in my head for a while. What strikes me so much about it is just how almost like biblical it is. It's the kind of story you'd hear in like the Dark Ages or something, you know? You shan't rest with the serpent harlot who cometh bearing companionship in the dead of night, lest she form into the serpent and steal the life from me. Anyway, to change things up a bit, let's talk about alien abduction. Alien abduction stories have been brought forth for years, and there are countless stories, many of which have some very common elements. People often describe waking up in a room with harsh light glaring at their face, unable to move, as a strange extraterrestrial figure looms over their body, performing some sort of experiment or operation on them. People are almost always taken when in bed, too. Yes, the alien abduction phenomenon has often been attributed to sleep paralysis. Now, while I'm not sure if sleep paralysis explains every alien abduction account, there are some pretty convincing ones out there, right? I do think that this could be a very reasonable explanation for a lot of them. You know, I mean, think about it. You wake up, bright light shining in your face. That could just be sunlight streaming into your room, like right into your eyes. I've had sleep paralysis in the morning before. You're unable to move, so your brain comes up with an explanation of why, while you're being, you're being held down, and by what? Well, then you start to hallucinate. In this case, aliens standing over you, performing some sort of operation while you believe that you're just paralyzed or strapped down. La Pisadeira. Originating in Brazilian folklore, the Pisadeira is described as an old, haggard woman entity with long, dirty fingernails, crooked teeth, a witch-type nose, and red eyes. She's often seen smiling a big, maniacal, toothy grin, and in some stories, she lets out a loud cackle when you first see her. Now, there are, of course, many similarities to other sleep paralysis demons from across the world. She comes to unfortunate victims at night, steps on their chests, prevents them from moving. Sounds like almost every other sleep paralysis demon, but the Pisadeira seems to be almost a cautionary tale about gluttony, as she resides on rooftops, making her way into people's homes to disrupt their sleep and terrify those who go to bed with full stomachs. Victims wake up with a putrid smell in the air, unable to move. That's when they hear a wicked laugh and the horrid sight of the old woman, almost resembling a corpse, slowly crawling onto their bed. And, to their horror, they can't even scream for help as she makes her way onto their stomach, making it almost impossible to breathe. But almost as quickly as she appears, she's suddenly gone. if you're lucky. But finally, we have the more contemporary Western interpretation of this strange phenomenon, shadow people. Now, there's countless stories of people waking up in the middle of the night, unable to move, and seeing a dark, shadowy figure standing at the edge of their bed. That's probably the most common thing people will describe. And though the name shadow people is a more recent thing, these types of stories have dated back hundreds of years. I remember when I first started experiencing sleep paralysis, I read a quote from Geezer Butler, bassist for the originators of heavy metal music, Black Sabbath, who described his inspiration for the band's opening track on their very first album, Black Sabbath, having woken up seeing this dark figure standing at the end of his bed. I remember reading that and being like, that sounds kind of like what happens to me sometimes. The 2015 documentary The Nightmare explores sleep paralysis with a heavy emphasis on these shadowy figures that people claim to see. So if you're interested, I think it's well worth a watch. And with all that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.